I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On this week's episode, we will break down the wide receiver room, see what kind of high-end potential we have in there, maybe what the floor is, ceiling floor type discussion. Tight ends getting a little thin at spring camp for the Gators. Will's new article came out on Read and Reaction. Let the Anthony Richardson era begin with the transfer of Emory Jones here. And we'll check in on a few five-star recruits. I know that's been something that we've hammered on this program in particular. Will says 3 5-stars are bust for the opening recruiting cycle. So we'll check in, see how we're doing on a few of those recruitments. Will, how's it going tonight, man?
Yeah, doing all right, man. I overslept for an appointment here tonight, so if I look a little bit, out of it, that's why you had to buzz me in on my phone, wake me up to get me over here.
Yeah, man. I think if I had 4 kids, I'd probably take a couple more naps too.
Yeah, it wasn't supposed to be a nap until you started texting me, and then I woke up. I'm really just an old man. It's like pretty soon I'll be yelling at a cloud.
That's good. At least you're self-aware. That's half the battle. You still got that about you. You're not that old yet. Let's jump into 2 bits here. We'll jump into the wide receiver positions. Go for the ceiling and floor of the group. Your top returners here, Will. Let's break it down into sections here. The top guys: Justin Shorter, Xavier Henderson, and Trent Whittemore coming back. If those are your top 3 guys, most years at the University of Florida, that's not going to get a lot of Gator fans excited there. Henderson certainly has – you could really look at this whole group and say they're all capable. They're all capable, but we haven't seen the high-end level from Henderson. Shorter quietly put together a decent second half. You probably weren't paying that much attention to it because the program was on fire. Whittemore needs to find a way to stay healthy, stay on the field. And so if – we haven't really seen that from him yet in a couple seasons. He's been a contributor. So how are you feeling about the top end of this group?
I think for the most part, there's a lot of number 2 guys on here. I don't know that we've necessarily identified a number 1. I'd probably feel better about it if Jacob Copeland was coming back and you said, hey, we've got that guy who has the potential to be the number 1, who's been on the outside for quite a while. But I think Copeland, he seems to march to the beat of his own drummer, and Napier coming in, obviously it was a pretty quick decision for him to leave. So I'm not sure those 2 would have gotten along all that great, but look, Shorter, 41 catches last year, 550 yards. So 13.4 per. That's not really what you expect from a number 1 receiver. You need a guy up in that 15, 16 yards per catch range. That's really what we've seen with Shorters. If you throw him a little bubble screen, you're not probably going to see much more than, hey, we're going to get a 3-4 yard gain unless everything's blocked perfectly. And even then it's not going to the house. Henderson, sort of the same thing, right? Steady, but not explosive. It's funny. I've heard a lot of people talk about him on punt returns and sort of complain about it. At the same time, I can't remember the last time Florida muffed a punt. And so there is value to having a guy back there who always makes sure that he makes the sure catch. And that'll be the question, right? Is with 2 tight ends, with the 12 personnel, with all the play action, all of a sudden, are you going to get these guys a little bit more separation because of it, or a little bit more one-on-one because of it? Whereas maybe last year they weren't able to do that. Whittemore is the guy who has been the most gifted out of all those guys, or at least the most productive out of all these guys when he's been on the field, right? The number of games that Whittemore's played the last couple seasons has been limited. 2 years ago, especially, you look at the explosive plays he put up 2 years ago. It was reasonable. Last year, a little bit less so, but again, somebody who's shown flashes but hasn't been able to stay healthy. I think if he can stay healthy, then you're okay. And then obviously you start getting into the other guys, like your Marcus Weston, Jaquavian Frazier's, Marcus Burks, Dejon Reynolds. Those guys all very, very limited run. We don't really know what we have with them. It's been one of those things where everybody's gotten excited about them, especially when they committed to the program, but haven't gotten a whole lot of run out there, which is surprising considering the way that Florida rotated its wide receivers 2 years ago, right? To get guys like Whittemore and Henderson and shorter time when they had, Kadarius Toney and Kyle Pitts and all those other, and Trevon Grimes and those guys out there. The rotation last year was a lot more limited. And so we haven't really seen what those guys can do.
Yeah. I mean, if I told most Gator fans that Justin Shorter posted 6 games with over 50 yards receiving in 2021, I think most people would be surprised with that stat. That's something where, again, it was quiet because 5 of those 6 came LSU, Georgia, South Carolina, Stanford, and UCF. Like I said, program on fire, not really paying attention to little 50-yard stats like that, but contributing. And downfield certainly had some downfield shots that were missed. Anthony Richardson opening it up a little more. Do you think that will open things up for Justin Shorter as well? Or is he maybe in – do we kind of just know who this guy is at this point? Is there a lot of hope for him to take a massive jump in his final year in Gainesville?
A massive jump, I think, is probably pushing it. I think, the idea that we saw all of the talent with Kadarius Toney before he really burst into that 70 catch season that he had 2 years ago. I don't know that we've seen that level of flash from Justin Shorter, but he's a different type of player, right? And so
probably more of a Grimes comparison, right? We're just that steady contributor who can be that guy again for us in 2022.
Yeah, I think that's true. The other thing is against Oklahoma in the bowl game a couple years ago, Shorter dropped a couple of deep passes, but he was open. And then last year, especially against UCF, but even in the South Carolina game, Shorter was open and they missed him. And so, the reality is Shorter has not been the number one option at any point along the way. And as he became a little bit more of a trusted option last year, well, all of a sudden, like you mentioned, at the end of the year, his stats started to look a lot better. So, they had him in slot last year. He caught a touchdown pass against LSU, kind of like a tight end. And I do wonder, one of the things we're going to talk about in a minute, but one of the things with the tight end injuries is going to be, okay, well, how do you modify for that, right? Are there things you can do with the guys you've already got out there? And Shorter reminds me, and he is not Kyle Pitts, but from a size perspective, reminds me of Kyle Pitts from the standpoint of you can box out a guy, especially if you end up on a linebacker. I'll be really curious to see what Florida does with its wide receivers, because I don't know that the best place to put Justin Shorter is on the outside. I think you need to move him around. I think you need to put him in a situation where he has the opportunity to succeed against a smaller corner or against a safety or against a linebacker and give him that sort of advantage. And we'll see if Florida is able to do that. One of the beauties of Napier's offense is if you can get the running game going, you're going to get some one-on-one coverage. The downside of Napier's offense is you have to get the running game going in order to do that you're not manufacturing those one-on-ones by formation so much as you are by being able to run the ball and making the safeties come up. So, I think a lot of it is going to be, can you hit those deep shots when they're there? I think a lot of it is Shorter's going to finally be the number one guy. And so, or at least he has the opportunity to win the number one position. If he wins that, I think he'll get more targets. And then the other aspect of that, obviously, is Richardson, right? And one of the things that Richardson showed last year was a willingness to go down.
Willingness. Yeah, that's the key too.
but not just a willingness, an actual accuracy, right? Especially to the left side and deep. Richardson was completing like 65% of his passes and, had a lot of explosive plays and a lot of his success rate, very high success rate going deep left. And, that will be there for Shorter next year, and he will be able to hit that. Now, the intermediate stuff is something where Richardson struggles a little bit more than Jones, but luckily those intermediate throws typically just end up being worm burners. And if you hit the deep ones, then everybody's more happy. So I think the changing quarterback is going to be good for him, but we're going to need some people to step up. There's no doubt about that. And, I don't just mean the guys who are on I don't just mean the Marcus Burks of the world and Dejon Reynolds is the world. I think Caleb Douglas is probably going to be an important piece. The fact that they're already moving Finley Graham to slot receiver says something about what they think about their depth. And then I think you're going to have to mind the transfer portal. This is one place where I think you usually want to be about 10 receivers on your roster. They're at 8 right now. And so if you move Graham over there, they're at 9, which means they really have space in terms of roster numbers for one more guy. The good news is that Graham is the safety. That's a place where I would have told you there was going to be attrition because they had so many safeties they've signed over the last couple of years. So moving Graham from safety to wide receiver gives him an opportunity to probably get on the field in a way he wouldn't have otherwise. And then certainly we've been excited about his potential use on special teams, and that's a place where he might shine as well.
Right. And Graham's one of those guys that fans like to dream about, seems to have a lot of athletic ability to get on the field and maybe make him that all-purpose type weapon where maybe get him a carry or two here or there, maybe a pop pass or something like that. I don't know. I want to see it. I want to see it from Graham before we get too excited there. Really, the guys I'm circling this year, Whittemore and Henderson, we need more than 3 touchdowns combined. They had under 500 yards receiving. Granted, Whittemore was hurt. Under 500 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns, that's going to be a bad sign if they repeat that performance. So those guys really need to step up. But Will, of the next group there, and you named off some of them, you talked about mainly, obviously we haven't seen a lot of these guys, but who in this group are you most excited about that could potentially step up between Frazier's, Weston, Reynolds, Burke, Pouncey? We talked about Graham and Douglas coming in.
Yeah, I would say Burke's the guy I'm the most excited about, right? I mean, he plays one game against South Carolina last year, 2 catches for 73 yards. So clearly you can go downfield with the guy. And so I look at it and say that was something that he was sort of touted as being able to do when he came in, was that he was going to be a guy who could be a deep threat. They put him into that one game last year, and lo and behold, he's a deep threat. And, you average 36.5 yards per attempt or yards per catch, granted only on 2 balls, but Emory Jones, there are 2 things. One, Emory Jones was going downfield, but Burke was winning the one-on-one matchups and then was making the catch when it got down there, right? So you think about a true freshman, it's his first game. He's going to be amped up. He gets open. The ball's coming his way. It's probably not perfectly thrown, knowing who it's coming from. And when it comes, you jump up there and you make the catch. I think that says something about his ability to maybe be a guy who can be that deep threat, who can be that game changer. Because, you think about it, like, Michael Irvin and Alvin Harper on the Cowboys, right? Harper was definitely the deep threat. He was not the most consistent receiver, right? But he was there so that people knew that there was somebody out there who could take the top off the defense. And then Irvin was allowed to roam free underneath because of it. And I think Florida's going to have to find that guy, and Burke may be that guy who you throw deep to a couple of times and everybody goes, okay, we got to respect that. Well, now that opens up that wide zone running game. That opens up, Henderson and shorter underneath. That opens up Whittemore coming across on, drag routes and all sorts of different things. So I think it's not necessarily, I don't think that I'm going to gauge Marcus Burke's success this year on whether he has 45 catches. I think if he's got 20 catches, but he averages 16 or 17 yards a catch, that's a really successful season, because what that means is he's opening everything else up underneath.
I liked what I saw in limited playing time from Frazier's. He only had 5 catches last year, 2 touchdowns we saw from him. But he looks like 6'3". Just seems like he's got the profile to be a real solid receiver. So that's a guy I got my eye on out of that group. All right, let's move on to the tight end position here with 4 bits. Florida is down to just 2 scholarship tight ends for the rest of the spring, as Nick Elksnis and Jonathan Odom are out with separate injuries here, torn labrum and broken scapula. That one sounds extra painful. So that leaves Keon Zipper and Gage Wilcox on the field. Of course, Livingston and Boardingham aren't quite there yet. And we've seen Dante Zanders switch back. I said position change here, but really switching back from the defensive line to the tight end to help fill a need for the team over the spring. Interesting. This is of note here because Billy Napier loves to feature the tight ends in his offense. Is this going to be a problem this season? Are we just looking at a situation right now where we're going to get 2 more bodies coming in the fall and everyone relax? This is just a temporary situation.
I mean, I think a lot of it depends on the diagnoses for these guys who are out, right? I mean, a torn labrum is not like a 2-week injury. It's not a hamstring. It's not a sprained ankle or a high ankle sprain. I mean, that's a surgically repaired thing, right? And the question is he going to be ready in August, September, October, November? Is he going to end up sitting up the whole year? Same thing with the scapula, right? It's a relatively unusual type of break that, I mean, you get it in football, but it's relatively unusual in real life when you're not playing sports like this. And so what's the recovery time on it? Broken bones are usually 4 to 6 weeks, but you remember things like clavicle, scapula, it's kind of the same general area. And you think about like Tony Romo, when he broke his clavicle, tried to come back early, got rolled up on again, broke it again, was out for the rest of the year. So you got to gauge that when you bring those guys back. Now, I think I'd rather have these injuries now than have them in the fall and have to scramble, right? The other thing is that, remember, Florida's at 90 scholarships right now, based on my calculation right now. Well, I guess not. They're at 89 now that Emory Jones decided to transfer, but they're at 89 scholarships, which means they got to trim 4 guys. If they're going to bring in guys through the transfer portal, they're going to have to trim even more than that. And so, one of the things that I think you might be seeing here is that some of these guys who are moving to tight end are sort of probably not going to be the starters at the position that they were originally at anyway. And, they're doing the program a favor while potentially, again, I don't have any inside information about who's going to stay and who's going to leave, but it strikes me that a guy who basically stays on as a defensive lineman, and then they go, hey, why don't you play tight end because we have a need? Chances are that's something where you're like, okay, we're only keeping that person if we absolutely have a significant depth need. Obviously we got Tony Livingston, Hayden Hansen, and Arliss Boardingham coming in here for the 2022 class. Those guys are going to be needed. And I think, it was interesting when Napier signed 3 tight ends, and Boardingham's a little bit more of a wide receiver. Livingston's a little bit more of a project, but when he signed 3 tight ends, what do we need 3 tight ends for? And all of a sudden with a couple of injuries, and, we haven't seen anything from Gage Wilcox either. He hasn't been on the field. So you've got Elksnis Odom and Wilcox. The only guy out there is Zipper right now. And if you're going to keep that 2 tight end set, you need bodies. And so right now you're sort of mimicking the bodies, and then you're going to get some guys come in there for fall camp. So I actually, I wonder whether this will end up being good for Napier in the long run. Like, he's going to teach everybody everything. They're going to learn, they're going to learn the offense with these guys at tight end, but it also makes me wonder, is Napier going to start making some adjustments? Because it's interesting. Like, you start the only real downside to Napier's record coming in, 40-12 overall at Louisiana. Like, okay, well, I don't have anything to complain about, but he is 16-3 in 1-score games while he was there. And if he'd gone 10-9, then his overall record is 34-18, which is kind of what you'd expect in 1-score games. So the question then is, okay, well, why is he winning these 1-score games so much? Now, part of that might be that he's ball control, that he can run the ball, those sorts of things. Some of it is he's winning some games he shouldn't. So last year they beat Nichols 27-24. But if you look at the actual EPA, the expected points added for that game, Louisiana only had a 23% chance of winning that game. Same thing with Georgia Southern. They beat them 28-20, but only a 16% chance based on EPA. And then Georgia State, they won 21-17, and they had a 38% chance of winning on an EPA basis. And so, that record last year, the 13-1 record, there's a little bit of a mirage there. And some of that is because I think of the conservative nature of the offense. And I wonder if this injury, it's interesting. Like, Urban Meyer comes to Gainesville in 2005, running that spread offense. Everybody's wondering, is it going to work? And he doesn't really have the right personnel to do what he wants to do. And then right before that Georgia game, they bring in Billy Lasco, have the fullback in there, have that as sort of the surprise for Georgia, and Georgia can't stop him to start the game. Eventually was able to adjust, but at that point, Florida really had a leg up and it got in the lead. Is this kind of that moment for Napier, right? Where the tight ends, that he wants to run the offense that way, but he looks at it and goes, we're awfully thin. We should probably install some stuff where we're, maybe like I said, bringing a guy like Shorter into the slot, or maybe where we're featuring 2 backs. And so, DeMarcus Bowman or Lorenzo Lingard is the H back rather than a tight end. And all of a sudden you can do some things out of that spot because you have speed, whereas before you were relying on the power and the blocking of the H back. So I do wonder whether desperation is usually the necessity of invention. And so having some of these guys out, I think, might make them rethink a few of the things that they're doing and make sure that they have backup plans in case Livingston, Hansen, Boardingham, and those guys can't pick things up. And if Elksnis and Odom remain injured, you're going to have some issues. Like if against Utah, when things started out, if Zipper is the only guy you got at tight end, you're going to have some backup plans, and that might then lead Napier and company to do some things that are outside the box that they wouldn't do otherwise.
2 words: tackle eligible. Maybe we'll hear that phrase a few times there, especially against
Cameron
Utah
Waits is the new tight end.
Yeah, maybe we'll hear that. Who knows? But some of ththese guys too, like Elksnis, Wilcox, they're built as more of receiving. Like, even Hansen coming in, Boardingham, you mentioned. Are they are they more receiving tight ends, or are they more blockers? And that's why I feel like we're talking about the context in which we're talking about the tight end position is more about that blocking scheme that he's looking to run here. What's the one position on offense that we feel comfortable with, Will? Like 100% comfortable with? The running back, right? Billy Napier likes to run the ball. We got to figure that's going to be the featured element of the offense this year. This could be a more conservative Florida offense than we're used to seeing overall. However, I do think that the injuries here, this tight end position, the tight ends, the wide receivers, quarterback here with Richardson, What is the high end potential? All of this, every preseason we see part of the picture, right? There's a few guys that tend to step up that were like, oh, good. I didn't really expect that from that guy. There's a few guys that don't quite live up to the hype. Same thing's going to happen with these positions, obviously. But it usually lands, you usually don't completely, not every piece of the puzzle is above expectation. You're going to have one piece of this puzzle is not going to. So if everything's in the middle and can kind of go either way, I think this, especially this wide receiver and tight end group, I think we can expect to maybe be disappointed by at least one of these groups come fall. You feeling the same thing as I am here or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is numbers, right? I mean, I look at it and I go, the tight end at the beginning of the year, you said, hell, we got plenty of those guys. But with Nelson and Odom going out with injuries, Wilcox not out on the field, and you got three of these guys coming in as true freshmen.
One proven, though. Plenty of bodies, but one proven guy.
Absolutely. But still, I mean, Odom and Elksness were guys that we had heard things about in terms of camp and their ability to play, and they have hype. They have significant recruiting profiles and those sorts of things. And you're always going to have situations in any year, even in years when you've got a lot of continuity at coach, you're going to have years where, okay, somebody graduated, we got to replace them, right? I mean, I think 2 years ago when all the wide receivers left Florida, and then you got Tony and Pitts and Grimes, you're sitting there going, can these guys replace what those four seniors were able to supply? And the answer was yes, but we didn't know that coming into the year. We were thinking they would be able to do it. They had shown some flashes on the field, but anybody who told you they were thinking they were going to get 70 catches out of Kadarius Toney in 2020, I think we thought he could be explosive. I think we thought he could be good. I think him turning into a first round draft pick was something that, was not something most people saw coming into that year. So I think there's an opportunity here for somebody to step up. The problem is that typically, if you're looking at it, you've got numbers at each position, and the guy that we're unsure of, the guy we don't know, okay, one of those guys hits. There's less guys to choose from here, right? And let's say Keon Zipper does stand out, and does become, a real threat at the tight end position and does a really magnificent job. Well, what happens if Zipper gets injured? Who's behind him? How do you manage that sort of stuff?
But even that statement, Will, what did he have? 9 catches last year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's not 11. He had 11 catches for 133 yards, but 11. he was behind Kamori Gamble, right? And so with Gamble leaving, you would expect the guy with 11 catches who's been out there on the field, who has been that sort of H-back guy who's done a lot of blocking in that capacity, would be able to serve in that capacity. I mean, look, I trust Keon Zipper on the field a heck of a lot more than I trust Tony Livingston right now. I mean, that's just the reality, right? I haven't seen Tony Livingston on the field. I've seen Keon Zipper on the field. I've seen what he can do, and I've seen him make big catches against LSU and against Georgia, right? So that he's not going to be intimidated when he goes out there. The question I have is behind him. And I think it's sort of the same question at wide receiver is, Shorter, Whittemore, Henderson, okay, those guys, but now you've got Weston, Frazier's, Reynolds, Burke, and then potentially Caleb Douglas coming in. All right, one of those guys is going to have to step up and be outstanding. Now, if they don't, then the offense is going to sputter somewhat. But, you said, where do I feel most comfortable about the offense? And then you answered for me and you said running back. I think the answer is quarterback. I mean, the place where I feel best about this offense is the quarterback position. And so, that absolves a lot of sins, right? It's
unproven. It's an unproven entity at the quarterback position still. I know you feel good. You think Anthony Richardson is completely proven.
I didn't say he's completely proven. I said that the point that I would make is that if you asked me, where do I look at, it's not as though we have Kyle Trask coming back, but if you asked me, do I see the things on film on Anthony Richardson that make me think he can be a really good quarterback? I say absolutely. I do.
High end potentials there.
It's not even a potential. He's already delivered. When you look at the tape from LSU, like that's a guy who's going to torment Kentucky, assuming he can stay healthy. Like that's the question, right? Can he stay healthy?
Yeah.
And so then,
because I was about to ask what other tape.
Yeah, but
there's not many. There's not much other tape.
That's not true. There's South Florida. There's FAU.
Wonderful.
And even in some of the, but again, those are games, and there's Kentucky where they gave him like 2 carries. So there are opportunities here where you look at it. There are games where Florida had played Anthony Richardson last year, they win, and it's not even close. I think they win if they play him more against Kentucky. I think they win if they have the ability to play him against Missouri. Though that was sort of the dancing knee injury. the idea that he's going to be as explosive as he was against USF, I think is a fool's errand because nobody averages 38 yards a play. But I think the idea that he was far more explosive than Emory Jones is true, and we'll get to that in a minute when we talk about the next one because that's sort of our next topic.
Yeah, I guess we are jumping into 6 bits here, but before closing thoughts on that, I look, I'm a huge Anthony Richardson fan. I see the flashes like anyone else, but to say he's proven, I don't know. We could debate that point here, but let's move on to 6 bits here, talking about the Anthony the Anthony Richardson era beginning with Emory Jones's transfer. You made some interesting points in this article. I first will touch on the Jones element of here. We were all shocked when Trask was the guy that came in for Jones at Kentucky. That line stood out to me in your article because I felt the same way. I felt like, oh man, if Emory Jones is not ready now, when's he going to be ready? I was a big Emory Jones fan coming into last year because that's a guy you talk about seeing some flashes from someone who could run Dan Mullen's offense seemingly perfectly. He seemed like the perfect fit for it, but we didn't get to see a lot of that arm before last year. And now we know why. We know why after last year. However, the offense, as much as we want to rag on the offense last year, still scored over 30 points per game. And I liked your little stats where you would pull out, but if they didn't have the Samford game, it would have been this.
You kind of have to pull out that 70 against Samford.
I didn't like that.
They were still chucking the ball in the fourth quarter because they needed to against Samford because the defense was so bad.
You can't pretend like that locker room celebration didn't exist. Every win counts, Will. That's for you, Dan. The Florida, you mentioned Jones being less explosive than Anthony Richardson, and you had some serious stats to back that up. Well, that's just setting the table for you. I'll let you take it from here.
Well, so this article started out as me writing sort of an ode to Emory Jones because I think Jones has handled himself in a really classy way while he's been here in Gainesville. More so, he wasn't shushing the crowd like Felipe Franks. Right. He wasn't, and he didn't. It looked like he and Richardson were really close and were able to manage a difficult situation in about the best way that both of them could. Right, and so. And the other thing is he was like the first article I ever wrote at Read and Reaction that had to do with Gator football. I wrote a welcome and I wrote like a Stars Matter type of thing. But after that, it was a football based article. And it was like, okay, now the site's going to make it. So I have a soft spot in my heart for Emory Jones. But when I looked at the stats for last year, Florida finished 21st offensively in yards per play against FBS opponents. So that is subtracting Samford from the ledger. They were 21st overall. But they were 61st in points per game. And so the question becomes, why is that? What is that gap? And typically points per game, the yards per play and points per game track pretty closely. And if the team had finished some 20 to 25th in points per game, Dan Mullen's still around because they win a bunch of the games they lost last year and the offense is a lot less inconsistent. So I went and started searching for why they were inconsistent when it came to, the game against Kentucky and the game against Missouri and, why'd they get blown out against South Carolina and all those sorts of things. And certainly the defense had something to do with it. But if you really looked at it, the number of explosives, so Jones produced an explosive once every 11.4 touches. Richardson produced one every 8.2 touches. So that doesn't just include the game against USF. That includes all of his touches, even the games where he was not necessarily all that successful. The other thing is Richardson averaged 38.4 yards per explosive compared to 32.9 for Jones. And then if you start subtracting things, so Jones had 43 total explosives, but 13 came against Samford and Vanderbilt. And his QB rating was 141.7, but that dropped to 122.6 if you subtracted Samford and Vanderbilt, which are the games that you expect to win and the games where, yes, he should play well. But what that meant is he had a touchdown interception ratio of 9-12. In games that were not Vanderbilt and not Samford. And therein lies the issue, right? Is that essentially it was really poor, below average quarterback play in all those games. And then you start looking in the red zone and he had a 174 QB rating in the red zone. Emory Jones did. But that dropped to 140.7 if you remove Samford. It removed to 127 if you subtracted Vandy. And then you go, okay, well, how about Anthony Richardson? Well, Anthony Richardson was 286. was his QB rating in the red zone. 6 to 7, 3 touchdowns and no interceptions. So AR threw a bunch of interceptions, but they're sort of in the middle of the field. One of them was the desperation interception against LSU. He was not perfect, but what I will say is he was absolutely perfect down in the red zone. And there is a reason why Florida scored points when Anthony Richardson was on the field. It's because when he got them down in the red zone, they scored touchdowns. And the only reason they really scored touchdowns when Emory Jones was quarterback is because Dameon Pierce was able to punch the ball in, had 19 touchdown runs in the red zone for the Gators down in that range. And that was really a Dameon Pierce stat, right? Being able to get in from once they got down close. So look, Anthony Richardson was not perfect last year, but I think when he got in the red zone, he was really efficient. And that was the difference between the two of them. It wasn't necessarily that they were getting in the red zone more often. It's that Richardson was getting them into the end zone once they got to that point. 2 red zone interceptions for Jones. So that was, those were sort of killers. And then just a lack of efficiency once they got down there, which meant that Florida's offense sputtered from time to time. And you think about all the times they got in the red zone against Kentucky and couldn't punch it in. Think about even the times they got in the red zone against Alabama and couldn't punch it in. And then there were multiple times against Missouri where they got in the red zone and couldn't punch it in. And that was just a theme the whole year long, where if you look at the overall red zone efficiency, you're like, yeah, it's pretty good. But then you start saying, okay, well, what if is it tilted, right? The splits. And that I think was really the key, is when Florida played against inferior opponents, Emory Jones really, really performed well. When Florida played against opponents who were equivalent or better, Emory Jones' performance really, really fell off. And, Richardson, like you mentioned, played against FAU, USF, and LSU were sort of his 3 other than the Georgia game, where he was pretty abysmal. And, acquitted himself well in those games, but did not necessarily have to play against the Kentucky defense and didn't play in that Missouri game and those sorts of things. So I think there's still stuff for Richardson to prove, but I think when you look at the underlying statistics, there's a reason why Florida's offense sputtered when Jones was in charge. And there's reason to believe that Anthony Richardson is going to be able to get things back on track, not just because he's going to play better than Jones, but because typically, like I said, the yards per play stats typically translate to the points per game stats. And that didn't happen last year. There was a disconnect. So if Florida's able to just essentially regress back to the mean, even if they put up the exact same yards per play, you're looking at a top 20 offense. If Anthony Richardson's a little bit better, now you're talking a top 15 offense. And if Anthony Richardson turns out to be as good as we think he can, now you're talking a top 10 offense. And if you got a top 10 offense going out there with a defense that has to improve with Grantham being gone, now you're talking about a team that's really competitive in the SEC East, not just a team that's rebuilding.
Look, I'm getting fired up at the prospect of a top 10 offense there, Will, but what are the odds we're actually seeing that in year 1 of Napier here?
I mean, so top 10, I think, is probably really stretching it. I think top 20 is kind of my expectation. I think that, and again, this is all the caveat that Anthony Richardson stays healthy. But if Anthony Richardson can stay healthy, the explosion that he brings in the running game, along with the reading of the defense that you were able to see in the limited sample size when he was throwing the ball, means he's not going to have to be much more than he was last year. For the, like, you start comparing stats, QB rating between him and Emory Jones was almost identical. You look at running stats, and Anthony Richardson averaged more yards per rush and had more explosives. So really, they were almost the equivalent quarterback, but Richardson was more explosive. Now that was in less opportunities, right? And so the question is, over the course of 400 touches, is he going to be as explosive as he was with 115 touches or something like that? Certainly, you might see that start to regress a little bit, but 115 touches or whatever he had is not nothing when you start talking about putting up explosive plays. Like, it's not just that he got lucky and had 1 or 2 and so has a really good average. He put up quite a few explosives when he was in there. And so if he puts up the exact same stats this year that he did last year over the same number of touches that Emory Jones had last year, Florida's offense could be better. And so Anthony Richardson doesn't have to develop into a quarterback who's significantly better than the player that he was last year in order for Florida's offense to be top 20. I think he just has to be who he was last year. Question is, can he be better than what he was last year? And I think there's evidence to suggest that he will be able to, but we'll see, right? That's going to be up to him. That's going to be up to Napier. It's going to be up to how many chances they decide to take. And in some ways, it's going to be up to the tight ends and the wide receivers we already talked about. Are they going to be able to generate the separation that's going to enable Florida to move the ball down the field? But what I'll say is, typically in college, especially with RPOs and the ability of offensive linemen to get down the field and the fact that they never call that stuff, means that the defense is always at a disadvantage if you're running a RPO based offense. And if Richardson can make the right reads, the offense will win. And you don't have to make a perfect throw because you put the defense in a no-win situation because they have to make a choice. And if you pull the ball and throw it in the right situations, and you pull the ball and run it in the right situations, and you hand the ball to the running back in the right situations, and you make those reads correctly, the defense is always going to be on its heels because they really can't win based on, the quarterback has all of these options and he gets to choose what he's doing. And it's going to be tough to win. So again, I think I have been hesitant to say that I think Florida is going to be significantly better than most of the projections are. But as I look at these statistics, I just go, look, the question is, do I trust Anthony Richardson to be as good as Emory Jones was last year? The answer is definitively yes for me. I think he's going to be as good. He may not be better, but I think he's going to be as good. And if he's as good as Emory Jones was last year, this is going to be a top 20 offense. Just is. And I think he's going to actually be better. I would guess at the end of the year, we'll be looking at a team that's ranked in the top 15 in terms of yards per play. The only reason that wouldn't happen is because Napier might be a little bit more run happy, and that'll drag it down, right? Because typically you average more yards per attempt on pass plays than you do run plays. And so that might drag it down a little bit, but I think they're going to be a top 15, top 20 offense. Is that good enough to win the East? I don't think so, because I think you're going to have a team in Georgia that's going to be a top 5 defense on the other side. And, that's going to be the thing, is you're still going to have to beat them. But against the Kentuckys and the Missouris and the Tennessees of the world, I think Florida's going to be able to run with them if they want to.
We've discussed Levi Lewis, the quarterback for Louisiana under Napier, his tendency to not run the ball as much as what we'd see. We know Dan Mullen wasn't afraid to run the quarterback. Do you anticipate? We know Anthony Richardson has great ability in the run game. Do you anticipate a little bit of conservative nature in terms of fully unleashing Richardson in the run game, because he is a critical cog to this offense this year? Do you expect maybe to put more of that burden on to the running backs this year than we've seen in the past? Maybe a selective 6 to 8 carries a game versus 15 for Richardson.
So that honestly is a Jack Miller question, because I think if Napier, so you don't go out there saying scared money don't make money. You don't have to win 13 games your first year. Like, nobody expects you to come in and win the SEC East or any of that stuff this first year. You will get a pass if you lose to Georgia this year. Now, you won't get a pass for too long losing to Georgia, but this year, I think if you play Georgia competitively, you'll get a pass when it comes to that. So I don't know that there's this like all-encompassing need to put Richardson's physical health at risk by running him all over the place. At the same time, if you're comfortable with Jack Miller, run him. Right. You can't go out there and play scared. In fact, if you look at when Richardson got hurt, like he hurt his hamstring running, he didn't even get hit. Then he hurts his hand when he gets hit when he goes back to pass, right, against LSU.
Came back in though.
Yeah. Then he got a concussion running the ball against Georgia, right? And then he hurts his knee running the ball against Florida State. But that was a knee injury that was already there. So, I look at it and I go, some of the injuries are going to happen just because they happen. Some of the injuries are going to happen because you hold on to the ball too long. And Mullen talked about last year, like oftentimes one of his quarterbacks reads is to run with the ball. And I think what's going to happen in Napier's offense is going to be a little bit more disciplined than that, in terms of they do an awful lot of work to have flood concepts where you have a long, mid, and high read. And if one of those things isn't open, then you can run. But the expectation is you're going to be disciplined in terms of taking that short throw if it's there, or taking that mid-level throw if it's there, and make the defense respect the fact that you are going to read from back to front. You're going to find the guy who's open and you're going to deliver the ball. Is he going to take off and run from time to time? I think so, especially if you get like a free runner, or, he misreads a blitz, or they don't get the right protection or something like that. He's going to have the athletic ability to make it happen. I don't think they're going to do a ton where they just expect him to do read option. I think read option will be less likely than RPO.
We're not going to see too many 3rd and 3s where he's lowering his shoulder and going up the middle.
No, I mean, I think if you're going to do that, you'd do it with Montrell Johnson, right? Do a direct snap, the wildcat type stuff to your running back. I don't know that it changes the situation at all, unless you're going to let him throw it from that situation every once in a while. And that was one of the things they didn't do last year. Now, last year, again, running Anthony Richardson on 3rd and 3 was fine because you had Emory Jones behind him, right? Or Emory Jones in front of him, but behind him when he was in the game. So if Richardson got hurt, okay, we just go back to the original guy. That wasn't ideal because of the way Emory Jones was playing, but it wasn't something where you looked at it and said, oh, we're going to have to completely change the offense or those sorts of things. So, but no, I think the amount that he runs is going to be directly tied to Napier's confidence in Jack Miller. I think if Jack Miller comes in and shows that he can be not just a competent backup, but can win games for Florida, then Napier's going to run Anthony Richardson when he feels like it. I think if he feels like if Richardson goes down, the whole season's going to go down the tubes, then, he'll probably be more conservative, but I don't think that'll happen. I think Napier had a good read on Miller before he came in. I think he's probably pretty comfortable if he's going to play a couple of games this year.
Good summary on the quarterback position so far there, Will. Anybody wants to check out Will's article with Emory Jones's transfer, Let the Anthony Richardson Era Begin. It's up on Read and Reaction now. Be sure to go over there to the website and check it out. On to $1 here. Updating a few 5-star targets. Will Miles declared 3 stars or else. So 3 5 stars. 3 5 stars or else. That 5 is a critical word in between there. 3 5 stars or else. 3 stars or else. We could have kept rolling around. 3 5 stars.
McElwain.
Yeah, we would have been fine. 3 5 stars or else. Correction there. Let's update some 5-star recruitments here. So first off, Cormani Mclean, I'm going to circle him as our biggest target here. Number 1 defensive player in the country. He's an in-state corner out of Lake Gibson in Lakeland, Florida. Visited Florida several times with Dan Mullen, but visited Napier's staff a few weeks back here in March. 24/7 had him listed as Bama UF at 50% each on that, but they've recently switched it to 100% UF on that. But is that official crystal ball there for 24/7 there, Will? A couple of them, right?
It's Newberg, right? So the Florida State guy is saying that he's gonna come to Florida, and I think a couple of weeks ago or maybe a month ago had him going to Alabama. There's definitely been movement, right? I mean, we talked last week about the emojis and that sort of stuff, and silent commits, and nobody cares about silent commits. You got to actually get pen to paper, or at least you got to get the video release and those sorts of things. But I think, and we'll talk about the other 2 corners as well, but there's a richness of cornerback talent on the Florida board right now. And, if they don't come away with some of these guys, I think we're all going to be pretty disappointed. Another
5-star that you refer to here, 5-star corner out of Phoenix City, Alabama, AJ Harris, thought to potentially be the subject of one of those smiley sunglasses emoji tweet, but Will, this guy, I mean, Phoenix City, it's right near that Auburn, right near Georgia border there, Alabama, Georgia border. If you can land multiple 5 stars in one class, I mean, even if you land one of the 5-star corners in this class, you're going to be pairing them up with Jason Marshall, Kamari Wilson in the backfield, in addition to like a Rashad Torrance next year. It would just be an unbelievable get for that defensive backfield.
Yeah, well, and I mentioned on Gators Breakdown last night actually, and I think I've been sort of alluding to it, and I've got something coming in the next month or so, talking about this. But RPOs have really taken over the game, and that requires that you be able to do man on man, and so it requires flexibility at safety, and it requires man-to-man coverage. And so if you can have lockdown corners out there, you can do so much from the defensive side of the ball when it comes to sending guys from all over the place and winning with 4 guys rushing, because now you've got essentially half the field locked down if you've got a guy like Marshall out there. Now, if you can bring in guys like McLean, guys like Harris, or guys like Tony Mitchell, who we'll get to in a second, now all of a sudden you have the ability to really lock down the field in a way that makes it really, really difficult for the opposing quarterback. And you're going to give up a few deep ones because every corner gets beat from time to time. But what it's going to do is it's going to allow your defensive line time to get home, and that's going to be important for Florida, especially as they build up the depth there on defensive line, to build up the talented defensive line. But Harris, came to campus. I think the sunglasses came out while the sunglass emoji came out while he was there. He sort of tweeted about it afterwards in terms of crystal balls flying his way. So there was an expectation that he might commit. Hasn't done it yet, but I think all signs point trending towards Gainesville for him. And, not somebody who's originally from Alabama, I don't believe. So it's not like he grew up watching Saban, loving Saban, wanting to be an Alabama football player. At the same time, we're so used to Saban coming in and just sort of picking and choosing who he wants from the state of Florida. So to find somebody who's sitting in Saban's backyard and say, hey, we're going to convince him to come our direction, I think is a big deal, right? I mean, it's something that says something about that circle that you're instead of saying, I'm going to avoid Georgia and I'm going to avoid Alabama and I'm going to go recruit, say, a Chris Steele from California. You're saying, no, I'm going to go right into the lion's den. I'm going to identify the guy in Alabama that I want to pull out of there, and we're going to go full guns blazing trying to bring him. And, they're doing that with both Harris and Tony Mitchell. And
I was going to say, two 5-star corners out of Alabama, Tony Mitchell leaning more Bama LSU as the leaders according to 24/7, but I can only dream of a scenario where you could potentially pull 3 5-star corners. Will, is that absolutely crazy?
I mean, I think it's unlikely, but I think 2 of the 3 is actually really a significant possibility. And if they pull 3 of 3, just, the article that I write, I will pass out while I'm writing the article. If they pull three 5-star quarterbacks, I think it's unlikely that all 3 come, but I think what this sort of does is set up Florida to have it be very unlikely that none of the 3 come. Right. And that's a huge deal, right? To sit there and have all of these guys on campus, all of these guys interested in the program, and quite honestly, all of these guys hopefully getting a full spiel on NIL and how they're going to be compensated in the same way that they would at some of these other universities as well. We don't have sliced bread over here like Texas A&M does, but with some of the collectives and the way I think Napier is going to, there's a reason he's going on like this tour. I mean, the coach always goes on the speaking tours, but I guarantee you that one of the messages that's going to be coming out of the speaking tour is that the boosters are needed in order to make sure that the right players and the best players come to Gainesville, and setting these guys up for success in that way, I think is going to be a big part of why they're going to commit to come to Florida. So, yeah, I mean, look, Mitchell, I think, is the guy who's maybe gotten the least amount of publicity when it comes to Florida specifically. Like you mentioned, he's not, there are some crystal balls that have gone to Florida for him, but most of them have been going to Alabama, LSU, or Florida State. At the same time, I mean, we're talking about a guy, 30.8 inches in the vertical, 4.56 second shuttle. You're looking at a guy with good size, 6'2", 180 pounds. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's ostensibly a first or second round draft pick in the NFL.
They already look like NFL corners. These guys, Cormani, Mitchell, AJ Harris, they already got the build of NFL corners. Crazy.
Well, they're all 6'1.5", 6'2". Yep. So they're all tall guys, but have the lockdown speed and all that sort of stuff. So the days, if these guys come to campus, the days of Florida giving up little floaters down the field against Texas A&M where they can't compete with the cornerback and the guy tears his ACL but still catches the touchdown pass. Like, the days of that are over, man. It's going to be a different day and age if those guys come. Now, look, I mean, as much as anybody, Napier has to prove it. He has to close the deal. Now, one thing I will say is I've got an article coming up probably a little bit later this week where I'm looking at some recruiting histories, and you look at basically where does Florida need to be along the way. And one thing I will tease is that Nick Saban's 2008 class, the transition class, only had 6 guys committed in June. And then all of a sudden he had 19 by the time he got around to December. And you look at Urban Myers, he only had 4 signed by June. Actually, he had 1. He had 3 guys commit in July. So the idea that there's going to be 17 guys in the class, I think, is unlikely. But what I will say then is if you go and you look, Dan Mullen had 13 guys in September, but the average star ranking was below a 4-star for those 13 guys. And so those are the types of things I think we want to look for. Those are the things I'll be highlighting when I write the article. But basically, we are going to know where Napier's class is going to end up by the time kickoff starts. Right now, we sort of have a blank canvas. We've only got 1 recruit thus far. However, what I would say is that the blank canvas is better than a filled canvas where we have very definitive evidence that the class is going to be underwhelming. And that's what we had with McElwain. That's what we had with Mullen. At, maybe not in March, but by the time you get to April, May, June, you started to see the commits roll in, and the commits were of guys who basically assured that Florida was going to be in the 10 to 15 range rather than the 1 to 5 range.
I've been working on an in-depth video featuring Cormani Mclean, a little recruiting profile. And one of the facts I came across when reading up on Mclean is that a documentary crew is following him around through his recruitment process. And the man had 5 schools. He narrowed it down to 5 schools last fall. It's up to 8. NIL, baby. NIL, documentary. I'm not expecting a June commitment from Cormani Mclean. I think that one's going to go down to the wire, Will. So we'll see.
And rightly so, right? I mean, I look at
it would be smart to play it out. Get those NIL offers. When Tennessee, they got their quarterback, but they might swing and miss at another guy. Maybe they'll throw crazy money at another guy. So they're smart to keep their options open.
Well, and even not in the NIL. When did Percy Harvin commit? December 19th.
Yeah.
When did Tim Tebow commit?
December 13th. Yeah, it was a domino.
When did Brandon Spikes commit? Mm-hmm. January 7th, right? So you look at the 5 stars who changed the program. Marcus Gilbert was December 31st. You look at the guys who really changed the program, and those are all guys who committed right around the early signing day time, back when there wasn't even an early signing day, right? So but you have to have space for those guys. And you have to have built up. You never want to grade a recruiting class on one recruit, right? We talk about the 5 stars. Those are the foundation, but you never want to build the thing around that. What you want is and again, I think this is one of the things that you're going to see when this article comes out. You look at it and go, okay, in September of Urban Meyer's class, they had an average recruiting rating. The 24/7 rating was 93.9. They wind up 92.6 overall. So it actually went down in quality a little bit from where they were in December, even though they signed Harvin, Tebow, and Spikes after that date, right? So those 3 guys commit, and then they sort of filled out the class on the back end with depth. But they had a lot of high quality guys already committed to the program by the time kickoff came in September. And same thing with Alabama in 2008. Same thing, quite honestly, with Muschamp's class in 2012. You can say it was unbalanced, but from a talent perspective, the number of guys he brought in 2012. I mean, you just start going down that list. You got DJ Humphries, John Buller, Dante Fowler, Brian Poole, Marcus May, Antonio Morrison. So it wasn't as though, that class was devoid of talent. It was just the class was all defense. And actually, if there was one thing I was going to say about where Florida sits right now, it's that when you start looking down their prospect list, who on the offensive side of the ball do they have who's trending their way? I mean, you've got all these guys who want to come play for Corey Raymond. Is there an assistant on the offensive side of the ball who can convince them that they need some, to come play for the offense? I mean, Peyton Kirkland is the one that you've heard probably the most, the offensive tackle out of Orlando. But beyond that, who's going to come? We've heard a little bit of Trey and Webb at running back, and then Chris Fazina, the quarterback out of Birmingham, is also one of the guys that we've heard from on the offensive side of the ball. But that's the other thing that we're going to have to see pretty quickly, is that the offensive side of the ball is going to need some talent as well, particularly with what we've been talking about, right? I mean, wide receivers are thin, tight ends are thin, and we're going to need to put some talent there.
5-star receiver out of South Florida, Ennis. I believe is he a top 10 receiver? He might even be in the top 10 on 24/7. USC and Oklahoma, top 2 schools. So South Florida, I'm not sure we're getting any help from there, but 5-star kid in state. You'd hope maybe we can make some inroads this offseason. But hey,
yeah, but some of those guys are from Miami, and so as long as they're not going to the Hurricanes, I think it says something. I mean, there you're talking about NIL making a difference. I gotta be honest. If I was a kid right now, I'd be at USC. Like, go out to Hollywood and, in California, have a grand old time. They're going to pay you out there. There's probably plenty of money to be had. Lincoln Riley needs to make sure that people don't think he's a loser who can't win outside of Oklahoma. So you figure he's going to be, the checkbook will be open for the kids coming out there. I don't know. That seems like an ideal place for NIL to really take hold. Right. I mean, all of a sudden, hey, come star in our movie. We'll pay you to be an extra on a movie. Look, name, image, and likeness. You got some high school kid who's doing a cameo on the next, on the next football movie that comes out or something like that. There's so many opportunities for this to be used and or abused with a place that's that close to Hollywood. I'm curious to see how that works out.
Another 5-star in-state here, Will. 5-star linebacker out of Orlando Jones, Malik Bryant. I have a feeling this is a top 4 that's going to be very common among a lot of the Southeast over the next few years here. Florida, Alabama, Miami, and Georgia. We're seeing that a lot this year, but Miami and Florida getting into the mix with Georgia and Alabama for some of these top guys. Get used to those 4 together.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And we've mentioned multiple times the state of Florida is just chock full of talent this year. And so, this is an opportunity for Florida to really announce their presence, right? All of these things where you've got Alabama, Georgia, Miami, all going for the same guy. And Florida's in on that. And in this case, Mike Peterson gets to prove his chops, right? This isn't a Corey Raymond recruit. This is a Mike Peterson recruit. And we'll see whether he can close whether he can shut the door on it. Look, I think, again, it's a blank canvas for Napier right now. He's going to have to start filling that canvas. As he fills that canvas, we'll know a lot more. But the fact that these guys are all coming on campus, that they're all saying very positive things, all of the communication from the recruits is that things are different than it was, which is good because what it wasn't good enough. And then the fact that these guys are all coming, having a great time and saying, I think the biggest quote that I've heard over the last couple of weeks is that the recruiting staff is all on the same page. And that, I think, then speaks to process. That speaks to having a staff that's working together. And that speaks to the impact of people like Bree Wade and Katie Turner being able to make sure that these guys feel like everybody's on the same page. Because let's be honest, in any program, you're going to have competitiveness, you're going to have egos, you're going to have all that sort of stuff that clashes. And it's going to be incumbent upon the folks who host the official visits to make sure that none of that stuff shows through to the recruits that are coming into the program. And so it sounds like, at least early on, that that's what's happening. Now, look, I mean, you end up 10th or 12th this year, and all of a sudden the cracks are going to, the cracks are going to come through. But, a guy like Bryant, he's announcing his commitment on July 23rd. So again, that's before kickoff. We're going to know. There's a bunch of guys actually who are announcing on July 23rd. That's one of those opportunities, I think, that Florida, is going to have an opportunity to pull 2 or 3 guys on that day. And that's where you're going to start building momentum before the season starts, right? So we will know if Malik Bryant commits to Florida there on July 23rd. All of a sudden you start thinking about what the Florida's average player rating is going to be. Maybe it'll be 4 or 5 guys, but their average player rating is going to be up there in that top tier of recruiting. And that's what you would expect them to carry through, because that's what's happened historically, that, where you are in September from a number of commits perspective changes a lot, but where it changes from the quality of the commit does not change very much from September to February. And so where they sit in terms of the quality of the recruit they're bringing in is going to be the critical part of it. And, it's not time to evaluate Napier yet. It's time to hope, but certainly, if he can convince some of these guys, and he doesn't have to convince all of them, just has to convince some of them. And,
right.
But the big thing is everybody you're mentioning. I mean, McLean is from Lakeland. Bryant is from Orlando. And even the guys from Alabama, it's not that far away, right? I mean, you think about Alabaster, Alabama is only a couple hours from Gainesville. So it's essentially the thing there is that the fact that Mitchell is considering Florida, and it sounds like Florida State is kind of on the periphery, says something about what Napier's doing in the state and what Napier's getting set up there from an NIL perspective, and also just from a sales perspective, because guys from Alabaster, Alabama usually go to Alabama, Auburn, or Florida State. They don't then make their way down to Gainesville. So to be able to get a guy like that in Gainesville would be a big deal.
Just a few updates for everybody. We're not going to get them all, but like you said, get a few of them. That's progress. That's progress there. All right. That's another episode of Stand Up and Holler in the books. Thank you all for joining. We'll be back next week. Will, you got any final words before we head out?
Just appreciate everybody's support. You and I are working pretty hard behind the scenes on some new initiatives. So hopefully everybody likes that when it comes out. If you want early information, you can go over to Patreon, check us out over there. We'll be announcing over there before we announce here everything that's going on, giving people an opportunity to get in early and get some of that information early. So, appreciate people supporting us over there, but appreciate the patience as the content has gone down a little bit this off season as we've started to ramp up some of the stuff we've been doing behind the scenes.
We are working. It's down. It's more of we're in R&D right now, right? We're a little research development behind the scenes. That's a good way to put it. In hopes of delivering better content. We're trying to improve a few things here for everyone. So in the meantime, though, we'll be back next week. Like Will said, if you want to join, if you want a bonus episode, you want more Stand Up and Holler, we'll put it up on the Patreon page. Be sure to check that out. It's only $2 a month. Have a great day. Thanks for the support, and go Gators.
Go Gators.
Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. And as always, go Gators.